Good morning, good morning. I am good morning, afternoon, evening, or night. I am Neville Charlton, founder and chair of my nonprofit organization, Youth Inspiring Positive Change. And our organization is focused on youth advocacy, empowerment, peace building, and how young persons can become effective agents of change, as well as a participant of the UNDP 16 by 16 and the country coordinator for SIPAN. Today, I am tasked with being a moderator for this online interactive conversation to identify recommendations on peace and inclusion social Council Youth Forum 2021, which will be held on the 7th and 8th of March. Today, we have an interactive session organized, lined up for you to include a Spark Talk overview of the SDG 16 Plus and our breakout sessions, as well as feedback. So today, I want everyone to feel free to share your ideas and recommendations on peace and inclusion, especially in the breakout sessions. So remember, the breakout sessions is a safe space for you to share your ideas and your suggestions. Just a few notes: we are recording the meeting, except for the breakout groups, as we want it to be safe as possible and everyone to feel free to give their ideas and feedback. The recordings will be made publicly available following the meeting, and the breakout groups, as mentioned earlier, will not be recorded. Okay, so everyone, I am asking you to please stay muted when you are not speaking. So now I'm going to turn over to overview and interesting meeting.
Thank you so much, Neville. And how great to see so many participants today for this meeting, and which is really a preparatory event to the ECOSOC Youth Forum session on inclusive peace, which is taking place 7th April. Today's event is held in the context of the ECOSOC Youth Forum, as well as in the context of this year's review of the Sustainable Development Goal 16 on peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, and last year's anniversaries of the Women, Peace and Security and Youth, Peace and Security agendas. So the ECOSOC Youth Forum session on inclusive peace is organized by a number of youth organizations and movements, and also UN entities. Today, we in UNDP, the Major Group for Children and Youth, and the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime, and the Global Alliance for Reporting Progress on Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies are very pleased to welcome you to this preparatory event that we have taken initiative to have, to really make sure there is an interactive conversation with the purpose of creating a space for engagement and an opportunity to listen to young people's recommendations for peace, justice, and inclusion, as we're bringing together the communities on SDG 16, on youth development, and well beyond. SDG 16 represents a critical opportunity to advance youth empowerment by guaranteeing fundamental freedoms, ensuring accountability, and opening up decision-making processes to young people's participation. And I'm therefore very glad that we can have today's conversation to identify more youth-led recommendations and build upon recommendations made in earlier years sessions at the ECOSOC Youth Forum, as well as other initiatives such as the Rome Youth Call to Action on SDG 16 that was developed in 2019 by the participants of the 16 by 16 initiative, drawing upon a broader consultation with young people from across the world. So great to see all of you. Thank you, and over to you, Neville.
Okay, so thank you, Maria, for giving us an overview of exactly putting it into context. Now I'm going to ask Ahmed El Shabat to get things started, and he's going to give us a spark talk and really jump into it to get everyone motivated. Remember, if you have any questions, you can feel free to post it in the chat, and I will take it out and ask the any presenters later on. So over to you, Ahmed.
Thank you, Neville. Dear peace advocates around the world, welcome you all to this interactive conversation to identify policy recommendations on peace, just, and inclusion. As we are celebrating today the Economic and Social Council Youth Forum 10th anniversary, The world is facing an unprecedented challenge with communities affected by the growing COVID-19 pandemic. At a time when collective action is needed the most to eradicate the pandemic, conflicted parties in different corners are still placing their bets on violence solution to their disputes. In hundreds of conversations I had with people from all over the world, I have found that human beings tend to hide their real interests, feelings, and fears, because sometimes they believe that their values are under siege or even under attack. It's a line that echoes the sentiments of millions of citizens today, with very different, but also with same values. My experience as a peacemaker and peace builder in the Middle East deepened my understanding of this statement. For a decade now, polarization between countries and political forces within the Middle East are wagging for the political identity of distinct ideologies and doctrines. We should ask actually ourselves, in what brand new ways can we force ourselves to sit, talk, and resolve, including with those who we oppose? In a few cases, the coronavirus made peacemakers better off in bargaining, actually. Far from the conflicts, yet close to the adversaries, my fellow partners and I exerted efforts to convene those opponents while applying a digital consultative mechanism to sustainably perform complex dialogues within a preventive and mediative diplomacy platform. All through a historic conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis, to a civil war in Libya and Syria, to a deficient government in Lebanon, all the way to a serious human crisis in Yemen. Using a moral leadership trade-off narrative, we induced the parties to deliberately maximize their mutual welfare through a set of informal frameworks, for instance, by understanding each other's identity, religion, culture, norms, and other forms of ethics. Inspired by the greatness of why the grassroots matters in the peace building, it is crucial to adequately mobilize people to action without falling into biases or unfairness, and important to examine how behavior insights can be used to craft effective solutions. Without peace, effective governance, and holistic participation, including youth, women, and children, we cannot hope for sustainable positive peace. A few days away from the official kickoff of the ECOSOC Youth Forum, I want to salute every youth for being a sincere advocate in the SDGs and SDG 16 in particular. Today, the one-step progress towards identifying your full potential for peace. The youth represent the best asset the world needs to overcome tremendous challenges for better human being. I have a full trust that our discussions today will have a significant outcome towards the conversations at the ECOSOC Youth Forum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ahmed. I hope everyone is inspired and ready to take action. Oh, apologies. Yes, I hope everyone is ready and willing to take action. It was especially the work we should now ask ourselves, how can we sit and collaborate for a more peaceful and inclusive society, especially here in Jamaica, where I reside. There's a lot of conflict that's going on, and there's a lot of violence, especially against our women. There has been a rise in the number of cases of violence, especially against women. So we are asking now, how can we collaborate with even our government agencies as well as NGOs and other agencies to see how best we can alleviate violence against women and violence on our own. So now I'm going to turn over to Priya Sood, which is the coordinator for the Global Alliance for Reporting Progress on Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Society, and she will give us a briefing on SDG 16. Over to you, Priya.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nabil, for that great presentation. Thanks, Ahmed, for getting us started. I'm really delighted to be speaking to young people today. The Global Alliance, I can tell you a little bit about the Global Alliance. I'm the coordinator of this alliance, and I'll give you the elevator pitch, and I'll be speaking with you for about 15 minutes, but I'm really looking forward to hearing from you about ways that we can work together, about unique mechanisms, innovations that all of you are doing all over the world. I am based here in New York, and sometimes it gets a little bit too New York heavy, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion and hearing from you from all regions of the world. Super exciting. It actually piqued my son's interest for the first time last night when I said, oh, I have this presentation early morning, I have to prepare. And he's like, okay, whatever, another presentation, what's going on now? Another meeting on Zoom. I'm on Zoom all day, Mom, more than you are. And then I'm like, it's with youth leaders. And he arched an eyebrow. So I look forward to debriefing him today to hear, to just have an effect on him about how important it is to have youth leaders alongside us. 15 minutes, I promise, because I really want this call to be focused on hearing from you. The Global Alliance for Reporting Progress on Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies. Big title because it is a coordinating platform of member states, private sector, civil society, and UN agencies really focused on monitoring and reporting SDG 16. I wanted to thank both UNODC and UNDP, the 16 by 16 team. They're both part of the Global Alliance. The Global Alliance is hosted by UNDP, and UNODC is an active Secretariat participant, for inviting us to participate here and for initiating the idea of pursuing further work with youth through this lens. We're very much focused on partnerships and leveraging partnerships to really help advance SDG 16 through a monitoring and reporting lens. So I am going to share the screen. I have a few slides. I thought, oh, I would just wing it and talk, but I think it's important that I leave you with something that to think about as you have this discussion. So let me just share the screen. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. And, oh, sorry, this is why. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, but I wanted to just give you some words around this goal in particular and why we're focused on it. It comprises 12 targets and 23 indicators, and it focuses on peace, justice, and inclusion. Something, I mean, all the goals are connected, there's no doubt, but this one is quite foundational and fundamental to the 2030 Agenda. It's very much unique and relatively new, even though we're 6 years in, because it was not really, it had a focus in the MDG era, but not specifically with one goal. So because of its new nature and because of its sensitivity politically, it is quite a challenging goal. As our presenters mentioned, without peace, without justice, without inclusion, a lot of 2030 Agenda will not be achieved. So we really feel that it's a priority goal and it needs quite a bit of attention. This chart that you see here has been designed and was designed in 2019 by our very strong partners, Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies. And it looks at explaining what we talk about when we say Sustainable Development Goal 16 plus. You may have seen that as well in recent times. And the reason we talk about it this way is because it's very much linked to some other targets. There's basically 36 in this chart, and there's more now. There's 36 charts directly measure an aspect of peace, inclusion, or access to justice, with only a third of those found in SDG 16. So there's several other targets under economic sustainability, social sustainability, environmental sustainability that are affected by this goal. And we all know, we've all witnessed what's happened this year, looking at SDGs 5, looking at the gender equality and inequality goal as well, looking at all these factors, how strong institutions or opposing it, weak institutions have affected the COVID-19 pandemic, on how we have responded to it in a very weak way. So this is why when it comes up, it's often a discussion piece that it's a bit more ephemeral. It's a little bit more philosophical. What does the plus really signify? It basically signifies that if you don't achieve SDG 16 plus, there's multiple structural challenges and obstacles that occur. It worsens violence, as we've seen, injustice and inclusion, and the plus can enable the achievement of the entire other SDGs, but only if governments and stakeholders like us collaborate, recognize the importance of the goal, and invest in its implementation. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the Global Alliance and to frame it on why we focus on reporting and monitoring. It encourages member states to really look at the evidence and see, look at the evidence of what's going on and report on it regularly. It increases accountability. Governments are then encouraged once they monitor to talk about it and say, this is what we're doing, this is where we're at, and this is where we want to be. Giving citizens, ideally, a chance to have a voice in that discussion and perhaps challenge some of the assumptions and data that the government is building up, and also work with them to make it more effective and meaningful. As I mentioned, we are very much focused on partnerships, so really SDG 17 in a way, bringing all of these partners together to advance the monitoring and reporting side, to build accountability, to expand civic space, to start talking about why it matters, in order to have it actioned and advanced in country. We're linking with UN country presence on the ground because our UN entities, and we have 7 that are currently working as part of the Secretariat, which I'm happy to list later down the road, that really have presence on the ground and can help engage on discussions on global issues such as SDG 16 in a national scale. So really looking at some of the trends that are happening globally on SDG 16, but bringing that to member states to say what's going on in your country. Sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. As Maria mentioned, I think this is a mixed crowd, so I just wanted to talk a little bit practically about what we could do together, what Global Alliance is working on now, and some of the ideas that could perhaps be pursued in our discussions. But of course, I want to keep it as open as possible and look forward to hearing other ideas as well. But just so you know, we are very much working on the voluntary national review process, the high-level political forum on sustainable development. It meets yearly in July. It was designed to basically have member states have an opportunity to speak to and to talk about what they're doing, where they're at in the SDGs on the 2030 agenda. So it's a mechanism that's set up. It's voluntary. But it is the cornerstone of the follow-up and review framework for the 2030 agenda. Now, VNRs, the voluntary national reviews, are actual reports that are delivered at the high-level political forum in July, and they're basically a report and a presentation that the member states come to New York to present at. They're clearly most meaningful, and it's written in the guidance and in the resolution. They're most meaningful when they are conducted through an inclusive, participatory, transparent, and very thorough review process. So in other words, I'm encouraging young people and young people's networks, youth, to really engage in the process. In 2021, it's no surprise that the theme, they choose a theme every year, is that it's sustainable and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a long theme, so I won't read it out, but very much they include an element on building an inclusive and effective path for the achievement of 2030 agenda. They are reviewing SDG, and so every year member states are supposed to report on all SDGs if they can, but they highlight a few each year. And this year, SDG 16 amongst 8 other goals are being reviewed, which are all connected to what's going on in terms of the impact of COVID. So, no poverty, SDG 1, on zero hunger, on good health and well-being, that's SDG 3, on decent work and economic growth, on reduced inequalities, on responsible consumption and production, on climate action, and then on peace, justice, and inclusion, and on partnerships. SDG 1 and SDG 10, reduced inequalities, is very much a link that's going to be hopefully made to SDG 16. So when you're in your discussions, perhaps you can start thinking about those impacts and how youth can get involved in them. Now, I wanted to indicate that there's a few stats here. We have a private sector organization company that helps us do an analysis of VNRs every year, and there's sources at the end of the deck where you can look at it more in detail. But in 2019, member states self-report this, so I need to put that out there. So they said, that most countries reported that they were being participatory and inclusive. However, only 28 of the 47 VNRs included SDG 16 data specific to women and youth. So obviously there's a lot of work to be done. I'd also like to emphasize that the data challenges are super challenging on, of course, every goal again, but this one in particular, because it's new, because it's very politically sensitive, and because it's hard to measure. I mean, how do you measure peace? What data indices and statistics do you use? So it's one of the ways that I encourage youth people to get involved in, and I can talk you through some examples in a few minutes. The reason we're talking about the VNRs is also to inform you that member states are taking it more and more seriously. More and more member states are reporting every year. It's more than doubled. And the DESA, it's run out of UN DESA, and they've had to cap it because they can't have everyone presenting every year because of the time constraints. So it is a mechanism that is being used, that is being taken seriously. So again, I encourage you to consider it as an action. We recently launched this mainstreaming SDG 16 resource using the Voluntary National Review to advance peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. It's a lengthy resource, but it is divided amongst chapters, and there's a specific, before I proceed, it's with our civil society partner, the Transparency and Accountability and Participation Network. They're also very active all over the world, and so it was co-joined. They're one of our members on the steering committee, co-developed, co-organized. There is a focused section on a whole of society approach on the role of civil society in VNRs. And there's two things I wanted to mention here. One is two ways, well, many ways that you can get involved, but a few ways that you can get involved. One is that civil society also does what they call a spotlight, or sometimes referred to as a shadow report to the member state VNR, putting in their perspective, because oftentimes, governments don't always like to picture the nice stuff, the good stuff, the positive stuff. And then civil society comes in and says, okay, but what about A, B, and C? And have you done this? Have you done this? Why aren't you doing this? It's sort of as an advocacy piece, but also very much data driven. So that's one of the ways that young people and young youth coalitions can get involved. The second thing is, I'm speaking quite quickly, I know, because I don't want to take too much time, is that the resource really looks to the Leave No One Behind agenda. So there's in one aspect, the way to engage in this process is as a young leader, as a youth leader in your country, in your province, in your specific region, to try to engage as much as possible within the process through the formal processes. So when, I'll give you an example, there's also case studies in here. When Tanzania did their Voluntary National Review, I believe in 2019, they did consultations with youth, solely with youth. There are also regional ways. There's the African Youth SDG Summit and the European Youth Forum that set up regional platforms with youth to review the SDGs and where they see it. So it's going in as a youth leader, but it's also looking at the data that's being used and asking, is the government really taking into incorporating youth perspective? Is there disaggregated data amongst age, amongst gender, different levels of youth, so on and so forth. So through that data lens, working with the National Statistics Office, engaging in that work, looking at how data is collected through census and through household surveys, are the right questions being asked? So that's another way that your voice can be heard. So those are some of the areas that I wanted to just flag to you. There's quite a few examples in this resource, so I encourage you to look at it, and links to several resources, which probably some of you know of, but could be helpful. So it's on the SDG 16 Hub. I spoke really fast, I apologize, but I just wanted to make sure that you had some of the basic information. These are some of the resources that we have worked on in the last 2 years, and the links are there. We also have done some advocacy work this past year on a call to action in response to COVID-19, which can give you also some language and some help in terms of informing your discussions with your youth groups. The one on your right, I guess, Act Now for SDG 16 Plus is with a larger group of, it's a coalition, basically an SDG 16 coalition. About 30 or so groups have come together, meet regularly to really, since 2019, to advance this goal together. And 100 people have signed on to that act. So another advocacy piece for you to use. So just a few ideas to get us started. I look forward to listening. I'm really excited to hear from all of you, and take it away. I will close my screen, sorry.
All right, so thank you very much, Freya, for that presentation. It was very informative, especially the key takeaway for me is we need to get more involved, and also engage with various stakeholders such as policymakers, NGOs, and non-profit organizations, because participation, especially from young people, our voice needs to be heard in the process as well. So thank you, Freya, very much. Now we're going to see if there are any questions. There's a question posted in the group prayer for you. It was from Ramis, and his question is, how can the absence of peace education be addressed in the SDG 16? He also stated there is little emphasis on the importance of peace and conflict resolution education when it comes on to peace building efforts. Priya, would you like to go ahead and address that question?
Sure. This is why I look forward to this conversation, because it's fascinating to me when I sit on these calls to hear the different questions. It helps shape my thinking and my planning. How to encourage more education on peace building, right? I think this, and again, I'll give you my personal story on this. When I go home, in my home, I'm Indian but Canadian, born in Canada. I go home and people ask me what I do, and I say SDG 16, and I'm talking adults here, not just children. SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 16. That's all I say. I work on Sustainable Development Goal 16, and these are generally in my group, educated, middle class, regular families, so on and so forth. They have no clue. They don't know what SDG 16 is. Sustainable Development Goal is a new language. So I oftentimes feel that we're stuck in our own language, the UN language, which is not necessarily the most effective in engaging with citizens all over the world. So my first point would be to really look at what type of words we're using, why we're using those words, and do we need to be always using that word? So that would be one, especially with youth. Two, I mean, I think all of you would have answers to this more than me, but in terms of all the social media opportunities, we're all online all day. So I think that it would be important to do some more advocacy on youth and peace education, and using technology as a tool to get the word out there. A lot of course, there's this digital divide. I recognize that. We all recognize that. So how do you get the word out without using technology? And that is, of course, this past year has been quite difficult, but I myself, when I was growing up, participated in quite a few youth exchanges and leadership opportunities, and felt they were of great value. Now I recognize this takes financing, which is a key recommendation coming out from from UNDP and UNODC in terms of building up financing to expose young children, youth, and young leaders to peace education. So I'd leave it there for now. But I look to you for ideas during our discussions as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Priya. Is there any other questions? I hope that answered the question as well. If there are other questions, you can just feel free to go ahead and raise the answer. It could be acknowledged before we move on. So I'm guessing there are no questions.
There's one in the box. What can we do in
yes.
area of partnership between youth organizations and state and government institutions toward SDGs? So like I said, one of the mechanisms that you can work on is this voluntary national review. And since I forgot to mention in my presentation, there are also voluntary local reviews in a lot of countries. It's becoming more and more used that local provinces are doing their own regional focused voluntary local review. So that's one way to engage with different organizations. I look forward to hearing from you, Dauda, on some ideas about how else to engage youth. One of the ways is through data, as I said through my presentation. How do you challenge the way data is being collected, create data that is meaningful and evidence-based that can feed into these processes. So start talking to the data people about how the household census, the surveys, so on and so forth.
Thanks, but I think, Christina, do you have a question? Would you like to go ahead and open your mic? Okay, I guess not. All right, so thanks so much, Priya. I'm especially happy that you touched on the aspect of social media advocacy, especially, before I go on, Siriata, you have a question? Sure, you can go ahead and just open the mic and ask. And then we have Emmanuel. So we take those two questions. Siri?
Okay, good afternoon to everyone. I'm Siri. Thanks for the presentation. I wish to ask that in my community, which I am based now, presently in South Cameroon, that's northern part of Cameroon, Southwest. So it's not easy for us to talk about peace, one of the peace and justice, because due to the environmental tension now and the tension which is going on in my community, each time you struggle to talk about peace to them, you are almost like a dead meat to somebody, because they believe that it's the top officials that are causing the problems in our regions. So how can we relate this peace and justice topic to them without being harassed or killed in the process? Thank you very much.
I'm going to take a few more questions, Nabil, and then I'll answer a few.
Sure, there's actually a question in the chat. What about SDG 16 in countries like Yemen and Myanmar? Christina, you can just go ahead and type your question in the chat if you are able to unmute. So any other questions?
My mic.
Okay, go ahead, Christina.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Well, good morning in Jamaica time. So it's less of a question and more of a comment. So, earlier the presenter would have talked about, a lot of persons not very familiar with SDG 16. And that is true, because I remember when I have been doing work around peace for some time, but it was actually about 2 years ago when I started engaging with Neville here that I realized that I've actually been doing work around SDG 16 and around peace. I think a suggestion I would make here as a youth advocate is that sometimes we have to contextualize that SDG within the situation that is happening in our respective countries. So for example, in Jamaica, we don't have cases of terrorism, but we do have cases of a lot of violence, youth and youth violence, and lots of crime. And what we're seeing an uptick in right now is a lot of situations or incidences of femicide. And that is actually compromising peace and security. So when I go out and I talk about femicide and I talk about our women being killed, persons are more quicker to relate to that situation and they're more quicker to come on board to assist, whether it be interventions, social or otherwise. And I think we have to do that in our respective communities and countries, where we contextualize SDG 16 with what is currently happening in our various jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Christina. So, Priya, we're just going to answer, can just go ahead and answer those last two questions, and then we have to move on.
Okay. I see one hand up more. I'm feeling bad. Okay. So, Siri, a very challenging question. And I think this last respondent made the comment about contextualizing language. I think I'm learning more and more in this position that depending on who we're speaking to, it's a very simple idea, but you need a lot of preparation to do it. You have to figure out what is meaningful to that person to get their attention. And in this case, in terms of violence and you know, these sort of tough, very narrow-minded individuals, how do you get them to open up that discussion? So I would say bringing more and more youth coalitions together, if in a safe, of course, way, if it is safe to do that. So bringing more voices to the table and trying to somehow connect with the people that we are speaking with. And I'm talking to myself as well when I grapple with certain challenges. In a personal situation, but also in a professional situation, what, you know, recognizing, okay, this is the block, what I'm saying doesn't really matter to the other person. So how do I shift that conversation? I'm getting a little bit too philosophical here, but that's in essence what we're all trying to do, right? You try to shift perspective, try to bring people together, try to get them to connect. So I can speak more to this point later, but just touch base on that. And of course, contextualizing what's going on in that country. So SDG 16, Sustainable Development Goal 16, that word is, again, UNEs. So when I'm sitting in some, you know, speaking to some indigenous leader in Peru, it has no meaning whatsoever. So what is the language I'm going to be using then? Talking about what matters to them, their land, their environment, their respect for their cultural norms. Those are the conversations we would shift to. So as same SDG 16, you know, there's a question about Yemen and Myanmar. How do you even begin to have a conversation there right now? This is what I'm saying. It's a very politically sensitive goal. There are high-level conversations happening, and through this ECOSOC Youth Forum, if there are opportunities to get some advocacy at a baseline at this point to talk about it. There, you know, I lived in Yemen before this happened. Such a beautiful country, and there's so much advocacy that was coming out initially, but now you don't hear much, you know, and it's devastating what's going on. Absolutely devastating. So trying to get as much information out into the news and getting it into people's minds, super important to keep it as a top priority. Now of course, Myanmar's in the news all the time, so all our efforts going to Myanmar, but Yemen, I mean, I've seen, because I follow that country personally, because I've had a personal connection with it, I seek news on it, so I hear about it, but others have not heard about Yemen in quite a while. Start there. I will leave it at there because I know time is running. There's 2 more questions.
Okay, so thanks so much, Evo. In the interest of time, we're making notes of your question, and
I can answer them after, so just put them in an email. Just send them
yes.
to me. I'm happy
So
to
just, and yes, so thanks, Priya. So thanks so much for that presentation. Everyone, keep your questions coming. We can put them together and then we send it to the respective speakers. Now it's time for the interesting part. You can also ask these questions in the most active part, that we really want to hear your voices and your views and your ideas and your suggestions. And this is a breakout session. So the breakout sessions is more technical, where we really want to get your views and your voice, especially leading up to suggestions. I'm going to turn over to Katerina and Eggsy to really introduce the breakout sessions and what to expect. So Katerina, Eggsy.
Thank you so much, Neville, and thanks everyone for joining in this enriching discussion. So the next in the next phase, we hope that we will have a chance to delve deeper into some of the questions, issues already raised. We have created 5 breakout groups that are centered around the lead themes of ECOSOC Youth Forum, so that collectively we can generate actionable proposals and recommendations, which hopefully in the aftermath of this session will be transferred into an outcome document and shared with the organizers. That said, the breakout rooms are specified around breakout group 1, digital inclusion and safe spaces, the group number 2, participation and decision-making and peace processes, group number 3, reducing inequalities and discrimination, group number 4, crime prevention, criminal justice and the rule of law, and the final group will focus on the partnerships for progress towards SDG 16, which some of these have already come up in your previous remarks. And the idea is that we will open the breakout groups and you will have the ability to select which room you would like to join. So rather than we automatically assigning you random discussion spaces, you will be able to select which discussion theme you would like to join. And we are very delighted because we have a diverse group of facilitators on board with us who bring their expertise, their commitment and passion on around these specific themes. And in the end of the 30-minute, 25-minute discussion, we will expect the moderators, the facilitators to share with us the key insights and recommendations that emerged your discussions. Over to Kat for any tips that she would like to add.
Sure, thank you, Ezgi. So just a few things to point out before we break out into these groups. As Neville pointed out at the beginning of the session, unlike the rest of this session, the breakout rooms will not be recorded. This is to keep everyone, we want to keep this as safe of a space as possible. There will be note takers in all breakout rooms to capture all your ideas and recommendations, but names won't be used. So you can feel free to express yourself without fear. I also want to remind participants to use language that is inclusive and respectful and avoid language that's offensive or abusive. And finally, we have a mixed group, so I want to encourage non-youth participants to take an active listening role when in the breakout rooms to make space for young participants. We really want to make sure everyone who wants to speak has the chance to, and we want to get out of this as many and as solid recommendations as possible from all of you. You can, so if you encounter any technical difficulties or if you have any questions, you can reach out to me or Ezgi. So we're going to try out this, you'll be self-selecting the rooms. So you can just select whichever room you choose to participate in. When you want to leave the room, you need to click on leave room to come back from the breakout room. Again, me and Ezgi will be here for technical support. So Ezgi, if you want to maybe give explain how they can now join the breakout rooms.
Yes, definitely. Once we open all the rooms, you should have a visual that prompts you to select which breakout room you would like to join. As mentioned before, we will have 5 themes, but this also requires participants to have Zoom 5.3 and over. So if any of you do run into challenges in terms of selecting the room, then Kat and I can support you and assign you manually to the room of your choice. I just wanted to add one final detail. The facilitators will be sharing the guiding and prompt questions with you ahead of the discussion. And in the end, they will signal the 1 minute, like when the time is up, they will flag that we're running short on time and it's time to kind of wrap up conclusions. With that in mind, I'm going to open all the rooms and see how this goes. We wish you a fruitful discussion. See you in 30 minutes.
So as I was making mention, I know there must have been someone specific that they're in the middle of a statement, conversation. We never have enough time, especially in conversations like these. But I'm just going to say that the conversation doesn't stop here. We can always discuss among ourselves, discuss in your network, in your groups. So it has been very rewarding, especially in the breakout room that I have been. Persons are sharing the ideas and suggestions and recommendations. I'm going to ask the facilitators to give a report, especially back to everyone. And I'm going to start off with the breakout session that I was in, which is digital inclusion and safe spaces, to just go ahead and give us the main points of what happened in that breakout session.
Thank you, Neville.
So remember, we
Hello.
just have 3 minutes.
Hello, I am Nandini Tanyal Alman from Mauritius, representing MDCY, Outright, and Digital Grassroots. I was the moderator for the breakout room on digital inclusion and safe spaces. The topics addressed were measures to be taken to ensure inclusive, equal access and use of ICTs for young people, impact of COVID-19 on young people's safety online, and role of young people in promoting safe spaces in the digital world. Our recommendations from the breakout room are: first, strengthening research and development to develop new ICT-enabled solutions for young people and incorporating accessibility requirements in procurement policies for young people from minority groups, such as adolescent girls, LGBT youth, young people of color, and young people with disabilities. Second, facilitate collection and sharing of information and good practices among stakeholders across UN member states, including researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and funding organizations. Third, updating legislation to include online safety in the legal definition of cybercrime. And fourth, setting awareness raising and mobilization campaigns by and for youth to create a demand for action. Fifth, lowering the cost of technologies to enable access for those in areas where broadband and mobile data are expensive and improve infrastructure to internet access. I will now yield the floor to my co-moderator, Mariana, who will keep up with our list of recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing with our recommendations, we have 6, training digital youth the specific issues. 7.
Hey Mariana, you are breaking up. I don't think we're getting the main points.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we had training ICT teachers on the digital economy to provide holistic education to youth, and also to teach educators the specific issues affecting youth online. And 7, educating youth about the dangers online and how to protect themselves, specifically on social media. 8, getting organizations of youth involved in policymaking through national and regional consultations. 9, governments should avoid internet shutdowns and prevent account hackings by state authorities to allow youth to express themselves freely, fulfill their regulatory responsibilities, such as tightening laws on sex trafficking of young girls, access to pornographic materials for underage users. 10, pressurize social media platforms to regulate against cyber attacks and cyberbullying. And we also talk about the importance of including not only youth, but also, as we say, teachers and other generations into digital spaces, because we talk about elderly as being a part of our population that is being excluded right now.
So thanks so much, Maria and Sandra, for that. Especially for me, I especially like the fact about engaging government and policymakers more. We can create digital inclusion and especially safe spaces for our young people. Now I'm going to move on to the second. I remember, guys, in the interest of time, I'm just going to give each person 3 minutes to give their reporting. So please, as much as possible, so as I can adhere to the time. So we're now moving on to participation in decision making and peace processes.
Right. Hi. Hi, everyone. Okay, with regards to actually participation in peace processes and decision making, especially on the role of the youth, was actually a very, I mean, very broad to talk about. So what we have so far, this is actually, it's quite. I would like to say thank you and thank you for trusting us your experience to with our group and those who participated in participation. Thank you so much for trusting us. And I'd like to highlight one is collaboration, which is actually this is one of the variables that actually common in in most of the areas that where youth can actually see their role in decision making and peace processes. And then another thing is that hold on. Sorry, I have my notes here. Okay, the access to support, and then third is the in terms of the proper the highlight how to highlight youth participation in activism, because in some areas in some countries there are actually a misconception and misunderstanding of activism and um, terrorism act. So there are youth groups that actually experiencing this, and the right to express to freedom of expression is actually oppressed. So from my end, and I'd like to invite my co-facilitator, Nicolas.
Thanks, Majid, and thank you all for joining that breakout session. We'll be very quick as well. I think Majid really did cover many of the points that were discussed. I think one was a lack of support and collaboration on a more international level, trying to build capacity for local initiatives through collaboration with international experts, whether those are UN entities, other member states, larger civil society organizations, but really bringing that expertise down to the local level and building that capacity to better engage was one thing that featured a lot in discussions. A lack of funding and an inability to really convince, again, member states, UN entities, international organizations of the valuability of their project and the reason why they need to get this funding to really carry them out. There was a few mentions also of the fact that when platforms do sometimes exist for youth to engage, the state and also non-state actors, undertake actions that really discourage youth from getting involved and from being active, whether that is unfortunately killings or torture of youth activists in certain countries, and or simply just a lack of recognition, as Maudi was saying, devoting a lot of time and resources to this and not being recognized in return, or not having the desired impact, then leads to discouragement and then a lack of action, of course. And then I think also one thing to mention as well was the links to education, really convincing people that within the context of education for peace, instilling this culture of peace is something that is worthwhile for everyone, and that is worth including in curriculums from a young age to really instill this culture throughout the population. There was quite a lot that was discussed, but I think I'll leave it at that. I know that we're short on time, so thank you all.
Right, so thanks so much for that feedback. We're going to move on next to reducing inequalities and discriminations. And please remember, moderators, stick to the 3 minutes time frame. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I would like to first give it to Julia to share with what we discussed, and then I could take over at the end.
Just 1 second that I'm going through my notes. So hi everyone. We've been touching upon different topics on discrimination. So one of the first points discussed was that often young people are not represented by policymakers. They are not seen as a priority, as oftentimes they have to fund themselves. So there's a need of more paid opportunities for young people, such as internships and traineeships. Then particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, people coming from or belonging to a particular ethnic groups have been target of discrimination fueled by media channels, especially people of Asian descendants. So it's important to regulate hate speech through the media, and education is key. Another group left behind during the pandemic is youth living in conflict. So crisis region face a double crisis, conflict and COVID, and young people in conflict regions have been particularly impacted and neglected. And then there's a discrimination against people with disabilities. And there's a need of more inclusive policy. Everyone should be included, no one has to be left behind. Another example of discrimination in conflict areas was given by Nigeria, especially people, terrorists belonging to a specific ethnic group. So now people coming from or belonging to this ethnicity have become a target of discrimination. So another point was how to include more young people during the pandemic, in the wake of COVID-19. So one of the points was through local involvement, through volunteerism, by creating more safe spaces, by creating more inclusive policies for young people, taking in particular consideration disabilities, conflict, and minority groups. And one last point was what can adult people do to support young people and to create more safe spaces for them. And yes, that was more or less, if you want to come in and add your points as well. Thank you.
That was great, very well summarized. Thank you so much. I don't have anything else to add.
Right, thanks so much for that brief recommendations. So very rewarding. In the interest of time, just going to move on straight. So next we're moving into crime prevention, criminal justice, and the rule of law. Facilitators.
Hi, thank you. So one of the main themes that came out of it was the rise of domestic abuse and family violence, and the lack of safe spaces, lack of access to safe spaces such as schools due to lockdown or curfew, as well as the denial of COVID in places where there is conflict and issues of militants who are now forcing enforcing youth to act in criminal offences, and as well as the lack of communication with leaders. So one of the recommendations our group have come up with was social awareness, and how youth can really be in the forefront of that. So talking about social media, how important that could be in raising awareness, raising not only awareness, but also sharing information on the rights of people in countries, as well as good practices, as well as communicating with other youth organizations, seeing what they're doing, trying not to negate what they're doing. So sharing a lot of the resources and things like that. As well as we talked about the use of radio and television, as well as leaflets, and sharing those around, especially in conflict countries. So trying to share those around with people that are affiliated with the government, just to raise awareness and the issues. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Finally, we're going to move on to the last thematic area that was in the breakout session, which is partnership for progress towards SDG 16, peace, justice, and competition.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to represent the group's discussions. Just due to lack of time, we were only able to get to 2 of the 3 questions. But the first question was talking about what the characteristics of a successful partnership is. And some of the things that we talked about were accessibility, flexibility, mutual respect, balanced commitment, investment, mutual benefit, accepting of values of each other, finding intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and building trust. And an example of building trust was learning each other's languages. So that is how we thought were the characteristics of a successful partnership. The next question that we started talking about was how to make resources more accessible and tailored to youth organizations. And we had started talking about how it would be wonderful to have a digital submission for fund proposals or for grant applications, so that we can showcase our communities, we can show how the NGOs are working, we can show what infrastructure we have, we can introduce people through video to the people that we hope to be serving with the money if we were to get that money. So those are the things we discussed.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we have come to an end of the reporting by our facilitators. From my perspective, before we move on to closing, I just want to leave a few recommendations with everybody, especially from my perspective on working in the context of the Caribbean as well, and working as a part of the UNDP 16 by 16, especially for each and every young person here. Just the fact that you're here means that you're a change maker and you want to make a difference in whatever area, such as peace and security. I could be even another thematic area, such as the environment. First thing I want you to do is really look at how you can take action, right? So take action in the context that I think it was Priya that made mention of it earlier. Join a youth group, join an organization, connect here, share goals with that organization as well. And then I want you to engage, speak up. It can be especially in the advent of COVID-19, speak up. Social media awareness, look at how you can create content online to target social media. Advocacy is very effective in the times of COVID. Speak out, look at issues, the marginalized communities, and look at how you can make a difference. Because from my perspective, at the end of the day, everyone always says this: change starts with each and every one of us, right? And if we can use our voices to make a difference, then that's a big avenue. So, especially for young persons, at times it might feel as if your work that you are doing, especially in peace and security, and seeing the high level of crime and violence, then sometimes you might feel as if not going anywhere. But you just have to be consistent, and you just have to partner and engage, and see how best you can make a difference. Now I'm going to turn over to Gilberto and Christy from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to give us our closing statement.
Neville, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, as Neville said, and providing your feedback and inputs. They're really valuable, and we want to take all of the information that you've given and applied here to the ECOSOC Youth Forum. And so what we want to make sure, and why we broke down the groups as such, is that we actually have different rapporteurs, some of them who are here actually today, who will be reporting at the ECOSOC Youth Forum on these specific topics. And so we want to make sure that your voices are heard and this conversation continues and doesn't just stop here. And these recommendations are going to be specific to SDG 10 and SDG 16. And as some of the colleagues in the Global Alliance talked before, we often use these goals, but what do they mean and how do they apply? And so I hope that we are able to kind of dig in and dive into these conversations a bit more. Just to give you some information, the thematic session on inclusive peace will take place on the 7th of April from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so in New York. And you are invited to participate as well in that session. I know that some of you have already written in the chat asking, how can I register for that? Unfortunately, the registration for the ECOSOC Youth Forum is closed. However, we're going to try and see if there are other ways that you can participate as well. So we will be sending an email, and Maria has already specified that. In addition, for those who are registered for the ECOSOC Youth Forum, and again, for those who are registered directly, sorry, I'm just going to post something in the chat right now, and it contains a Zoom link that you're able to register for this specific session. So we really encourage you to go ahead and do so and make sure that you are able to participate. I know, especially for people located in Asia, it is going to be quite late for you. So I understand due to timing constraints, it may not be possible, but we really want to make sure that as many of you are able to attend as possible. And so I just want to say thank you again for providing your inputs and feedback. I really hope that you are able to attend, and we look forward to continuing this conversation next week.
All right, so thanks so much, Christy. We have come to the end of our session. Before I go, just a minute. All right, so thanks everyone. If you'd like, you can also follow the work of UNDP on social media at UNDP for Youth. If you'd also like, you can also follow me, follow our work at on social media at Positive.org.ja. And just a little thought to leave with each and everyone here on the call today, that at the end of the day, even when you're doing advocacy work, as I made mention before, you just have to be committed to it. At times you might see, especially working in peace and security, we can see there are a lot of issues, but I know the recommendations that are being put forward here today will be very useful. And feel free to connect everyone. It was a great session. Thank you so much for being here.